My title was given to me by Ken Smith, who has a great facility with language. I thank him for inviting me and giving me this opportunity to talk to you about it. And as you see, it's pretty comprehensive. And we're going to do that. There is an official definition of resistance. You just don't go out and spray and it doesn't work, and oh my goodness, this is a problem. As you see, it is an inherited ability for a population, and this population is key, to survive and reproduce after exposure to a dose that would have controlled the previously unselected or susceptible population. We're going to have a whole presentation by Neil DeBurgos, who is an internationally recognized expert on resistance on this, so I'm not going to belabor it, other than to say that it is an official process. Really, it should start with field failure collection and evaluation. So when we talk about resistance, or when I show data on resistance, this is not something that was casually observed. This is hard data that has been compiled by weed scientists. For example, this is the sort of thing that you find when you do an evaluation. I think it's very clear. Susceptible grows. If you have a low level of resistance, you'll typically get this kind of a distribution. If you get what we have with the pigweed, you're going to have what we have over here. Basically, they all survive. I think people have seen that in the field throughout Arkansas and other places this year. Now, the real acid test of this is you start in the field, you go back to the field. The level of resistance that we have in the pigweed varies between locations, and there's reasons for that. But there's no question that if you ask how much, it is way too much. We're looking here at a North Carolina situation. There actually is in cotton there. There's one bowl at least that's peeking out. But you can see the mess that we have. This would be 88 ounces of glyphosate, which is a 4x rate 3 times, and it does essentially nothing. Okay? We've always had pigweeds. Pigweeds are one of the most common weeds throughout North America. In the north, the dominant weed at one time was Amaranthus retroflexus, which is redroot. That has largely been replaced in several areas by Amaranthus rudis or tuberculatus. They have been combined by Bryson and DeFelice in the most recent authoritative taxonomic work. And they're waterhemps, tall waterhemp, common waterhemp. And as we'll indicate here, there are serious problems with them in the Midwest and coming south through this big rivers area. In the south, I believe Dick Oliver will agree with me on this. The dominant weed for many years was smooth, which is hybridus. And over the last decade, it has been routed by Palmer Amaranth. And there's good data on this because the Southern Weed Science Society had the perspicacity to actually continuously maintain data on this. And we can demonstrate a progressive replacement of smooth by Palmer. There are also 17 other species of the weeds. Okay, this is a little bit of washed out, but looks pretty good up there. This is tuberculatus. It is a dioecious annual. Dioecious means there are male and female plants. All right? Tall growing, produces many seed. And this is the weed that you have come to know and love. It is also a dioecious annual weed. It can grow to 8 feet tall, and it's been documented to produce 500,000 seed per plant for a freestanding plant. So, I mean, it just completely blows out any population of crop that you'd ever, one plant produces 10x the normal seeding rate for any crop that we have. Both of these plants have male and female. So they augment the base genetic diversity by continuously mixing it. And this is the rogues gallery. They look pretty similar. If you see either one of them, you're probably in trouble because so far as we know, virtually every agricultural county in Arkansas now has resistant Palmer Amaranth, and some have Waterhemp. Okay. To understand this, we have to talk about what is mode of action. In simple words, it is the way an herbicide kills a plant. There are 4 modes of action that we have to talk about, for example, in cotton and soybean. I think ALS most people are familiar with. Many compounds, Pursuit, Scepter, for example, staple, commonly used compounds. These compounds began to be ineffective Well, I was going to say 10 years ago, but it's almost 20 at this time, all right? Everybody knows glyphosate. Everybody pretty much knows about protoporphyrinogen oxidase herbicides, Valor, Reflex, Flexstar. Notice this, okay? We are using Valor in peanuts and other places. We are using Reflex in cotton. We are using Flexstar in soybean. Does this sound like a problem? The answer is yes, this is a problem, all right? We also have Ignite. Bayer Crop Science is making they have learned, they have watched what has happened here. They're making particular efforts that we do not abuse this mode of action. And I encourage you to use good stewardship with it, and we'll discuss that later today, because it's going to be what's blocking the door because there's nothing behind it. All right. Starting out with ALS. I think most people are familiar with this in a general way. In the early 90s, we had, this was low-rate stuff, it was wonderful stuff. Well, basically in 3 years, it was very specifically target site. We lost it in about 3 years. It went down over that period, and what happened was we were rescued by transgenic technology. Now, I'm showing you the years 2000 up here to 2009. We're basically at saturation in soybean, in fact, have very few alternatives to glyphosate-resistant soybean. We're at saturation almost in cotton, except for some of the western cotton. We'll talk about some of the alternatives there. Corn is really troublesome to us because atrazine, right now, the herbicide atrazine is holding together the efficacy of all the post-emergence broad-spectrum herbicides for broadleaf crops. If there were to be a problem with atrazine or regulatory action against atrazine, the whole system of weed control for arable crops in the United States could be compromised. This is a very serious issue. Atrazine is holding us together. The progressive use of glyphosate in corn is a serious threat to the system overall because of the exposure, and I will now illustrate it. This is data directly from the Monsanto website. What it's showing you here is that yellow is soybean, red is cotton. Those crops are pretty much saturated. If we move in here and increase the corn, and this is only through 206, and there's a reason, because the herbicide data that I have only goes to 206, we are exposing almost 120 million acres a year to glyphosate. As you see, it is not sustainable. All right? And this is what has happened in beans. Basically, the red is glyphosate, and you can see the dominance of the herbicide up through 206. Cotton is quite similar, although the weed pattern, the use of materials is more diverse in cotton because it's always a three-shot system. This is the one that's troubling. And if we had this data out into the current time, it would even show more concentration of the use of glyphosate in corn. All right? If you put it all together, that's the aggregate exposure of the four principal modes of action used in arable crops in the United States right now, currently dominated by the herbicide glyphosate. All right? And that's the result. And it was a predictable result. This was a predictable result. All right? Worldwide data now shows that we have, it says 19 here, but there's now 20 weeds are resistant to the herbicide glyphosate. Okay? And we have several of them in the U.S. We can talk about them later. I may be running behind. This is what it looks like. We're talking about where. The problem began, it's documented phenomena, from this field in Macon, Georgia. I think it's obvious. I think the problem is obvious. All right. Ooh, that's, okay, shows up pretty good. That's Macon. All right, Macon County, Georgia, 204. These are verifiable data. In every case, a collection has been made, verified by the procedure that I showed. And this has been compiled by the extension specialists of the respective contributing states. First, and this is from the year of collection, these plants were basically escape control. Seed was collected in 204. That's the next one. How many people think that that's spread by seed or wind? Well, it wasn't. We know, for example, that the Georgia and the Tennessee population have different mechanisms of resistance. We're currently classifying some of these ascensions in Carolina, and we suspect that they're different as well. It may be that the Georgia mechanism of action, because it's so strong, is replacing these others. Okay, this is 206, this is 207, this is 208, and then we needed a new map. This is 209, all right? Just at the crop management seminar, I said, anybody who is in one of these counties or adjacent to one of these counties must start with a program approach. In 2011, put down a pre, immediately see if they have obtained control and react accordingly. Anyone who lives in any one of these counties must put down a pre this year to start either cotton or soybean. No excuses, no questions asked, okay? And I would suggest the adjacent counties for the following reason. That's the trend line. We did this a couple days ago and tried to fit it to a geometric curve and failed. That is exponential. We are facing the exponential expansion of this weed in verified data that has been collected collectively by the weed specialists. Okay? What have we done? We have increased the complexity and costs of weed management for sure in cotton and soybean. We have compromised conservation tillage. That's why Andrew Wargo is doing the work that he is doing with weed science. We consider this a serious situation, and we are seriously addressing it. What is more of concern is what I've pointed out to you with the mode of action data. We are in danger of precipitating a cascade of resistance in post-emergence broadleaf herbicides. We are marginal in most of them right now. All right. Let me illustrate that. Consider soybean. AOS in this state is largely ineffective. It's compromised in many places. Glyphosate is also compromised in this state and in many places. If we should have failure with the PPO herbicides, the only herbicide that we would have left to us would be Ignite. All right? In cotton, we're one step closer because you can't use the PPOs over the top. You have to use them pre. And they're either activated by soil moisture or they're not. The selective post-emergence option that we now have in cotton is Ignite. All right? What are the problems of resistance management? Why isn't it generally implemented? Well, there's the usual problem. The cost of post-resistant management are unknown. I mean, you know what it costs now. Growers are great at going to cost-effective approaches. All right? People tend to reject a diversified program if it costs more, or if they believe that it costs more, even if perhaps it results in better yields, and we have data in some cases to show that it does, okay? The new problem is this is not 1980. We do not have the next mode of action. The last new mode of action to be registered in the United States was in 1993. All right, we are now to the point where we are simply running out of activity of post-emergence herbicides. All right. The Weed Science Society of America has been engaged by USDA APHIS that releases transgenic cultivars, and by EPA that registers them. This is not only on their radar screen, it's been on their radar screen for 3 years. They are actively engaged in what to do about this problem. They approached WSSA, Weed Science Society, what is this thing? So a definitive report has been authored by the society, led by Dr. Bill Vinsel of the University of Georgia. It was submitted on the 5th. We've received 11 pages of comments. I believe it'll soon be finalized, and then we expect that it will be further published in the journal. It is a definitive statement about herbicide resistance in plants. All right? Over the summer, Mike Barrett, myself, and others, several people prominently involved here, Jason Norsworthy, others, were involved in trying to put together a significant grant to NIFA. I thought we did a good job. We had work in the Mid-South. We had work in the Midwest. We had coordination between the groups. We were going to look at the dioecious amaranths as a problem. That was rejected, and I have pointed out to them that concentration of this kind of authority over research funds is probably not a good idea because, in fact, they have missed the number one problem that is threatening row crop production in the United States. So we did not get this money, and we will be hampered because we didn't. And it will hurt the Midwest and the Mid-South and other parts of the country because of our failure to secure this funding. A second document is in preparation. The Vinsel and al. Paper poses a definitive statement of the problem. APHIS and EPA have come back to the Weed Science Society and say, what should we do? An expert committee has been formed. That document is in preparation. Okay, so come back to finish up here. These are Ken's questions. How much, to what, and where? Palmeri amaranth is really a long-time resident of the Southwest where it continues to be susceptible, but it is now frequently dominant in the Southeast and the Mid-South. It is often resistant to ALS. It is generally resistant to glyphosate in North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Tennessee, Arkansas, Missouri, northern Mississippi, and central Louisiana. If you are there, use a pre. What do we have going on? Clearly, we need new weed management systems. And we're going to have to make them up at least in the 3 to 5 year scenario with the materials, that is the herbicides that we now have. We need to save conservation tillage, and conservation tillage is under threat. Most of the soil scientists that advocate this developed this system because of the fantastic efficacy and reliability of the herbicide glyphosate. And working with them, I'm not sure that in all cases they fully appreciate how instrumental glyphosate was to that current system. Elton's coming on. Need to implement resistance management. This is not a want to, this is a have to. And then we have a further question. The paper of Vinsel and the paper of Shaw will show that where we are now in weed management is intimately connected with the development of herbicide-resistant traits. When we talk about resistance management, we also must talk about trait management.